we embark on a journey back in time to a world where the sea was both a dangerous adversary and a path to limitless adventure. You stand on the deck of a Viking longship, the salty wind biting at your skin, the vast ocean stretching out in all directions. Waves crash rhythmically against the hull, and the only sound is the creaking of wood and the murmurs of the crew. Above you, the stars twinkle, and you know that, as a Viking navigator, these celestial bodies are your guide to survival. But you're not just on any ship. You're aboard one of the most advanced maritime vessels of the time, a Viking longship. These ships were sleek and fast, built to sail across the rough waters of the North Atlantic. Yet, despite their speed and agility, the Vikings were not just relying on the wind to get them where they wanted to go. They had a whole set of secret navigation techniques that allowed them to explore unknown lands, conquer distant shores, and trade with far-off civilizations. Now imagine yourself navigating these treacherous waters, relying on your wits, your memory, and the tools at your disposal. You probably won't survive this voyage without understanding just how extraordinary the Vikings were in their ability to read the seas. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the Viking world, the sea was more than just a means of transportation. It was a way of life. Viking raids, expeditions, and trades across vast distances were all fueled by the need to navigate unknown waters. But the Vikings didn't have the luxury of modern GPS, maps, or compasses. What they did have was a mix of practical tools, sharp instincts, and a deep connection to the natural world. They didn't simply rely on the stars to guide them, but also the winds, the sun, and even the creatures of the sea. This sophisticated system of navigation, developed over centuries, became the backbone of their expansion. With it, they were able to cross the stormy waters of the North Atlantic, explore new lands, and even establish colonies far from their Scandinavian homeland. You may wonder, how did they manage to navigate such vast distances without getting hopelessly lost in the middle of the ocean? The answer lies in a combination of techniques that range from the scientifically brilliant to the almost mystical. As we move through tonight's journey, you'll discover just how these ancient navigators made the impossible possible. You're still aboard the longship, feeling the rocking motion of the waves beneath your feet. The crew is focused, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of land. But you're not just looking for a distant shore. You're looking for clues, the subtle signs that the Vikings relied on to know exactly where they were, even in the vastness of the ocean. And there's something in the air tonight, something that sets the tone for your journey, the need for navigation. Viking ships, with their sleek hulls and shallow drafts, were built for speed and agility, designed to tackle both open seas and shallow rivers. These vessels were the key to Viking expansion, and the men aboard them were highly skilled navigators who had to be. With no compass or modern tools to rely on, the Vikings needed to understand their surroundings in ways that would seem almost impossible to us today. They didn't just rely on the stars. They had an intricate knowledge of the sea, the weather, and the natural world that guided their every move. But the sea is unpredictable, and even the most experienced sailors could be lost if they didn't have a solid way of finding their bearings. So the Vikings had to develop a method of navigation that worked in any conditions. And that's where their exceptional skills came into play. Whether navigating by the sun, the wind, or the stars, the Vikings had a keen sense of direction that allowed them to make the most of their voyages. One of the most essential elements of Viking navigation was an understanding of the wind. The wind wasn't just something to help the sails catch the breeze. It was a tool in itself. By learning the patterns of the wind, the Vikings could predict the best routes to take and avoid areas where the winds would be unfavorable. Understanding the wind meant knowing the best times to set out and when to wait for more favorable conditions. For Vikings, this was as much about patience as it was about knowledge. They were masters at reading the subtle shifts in the wind, using their observations to guide their ships along safe and successful routes, Historians still debate the extent to which the Vikings relied on specific winds or if they had a more instinctive, experience-based understanding of the air currents. What is certain is that the Vikings used the wind as a crucial part of their navigational toolkit. It's incredible to think that something as simple as a breeze could make or break an expedition. Yet it was a daily factor in the Vikings' world, shaping their routes, their destinations, and ultimately their success. So as you stand on the deck, with the wind whipping around you, consider how much the Vikings trusted their understanding of the forces of nature. It wasn't just about setting sail, it was about knowing when to go and when to wait, how to adjust to the ever-changing elements. Without this deep knowledge, the Vikings wouldn't have been able to reach the distant lands that they did. Lands like Greenland, Iceland, and even parts of North America. The ocean stretches endlessly before you, a vast expanse of blue. The crew's faces are set, their gazes unwavering as they scan the horizon for land. But the truth is, no one knows exactly where the land is. The Vikings didn't have a map to follow. Instead, they had something far more intuitive, an intricate connection with the world around them. You feel the same intuition stirring in your chest as you realize just how vast and wild the world must have seemed to the Vikings when they set out from Scandinavia. But they weren't deterred by that vastness. They embraced it, using everything available to them to find their way. For the Vikings, navigation was about more than just reading the sky. While the stars were certainly crucial to their methods, the sea itself held many secrets that the Vikings had learned to unlock over generations. One of the most remarkable aspects of Viking navigation was how they used environmental cues to guide them. The sight of birds flying in the distance, the way the ocean swells moved, the direction of the wind, all of these were part of the Vikings' vast store of knowledge. But birds were particularly important. You've likely heard of how seabirds, like seagulls, are often associated with the proximity of land. The Vikings knew that birds flying in a particular direction could indicate the presence of land in that direction, even if it wasn't visible to the naked eye yet. The reason? Birds, much like the Vikings themselves, followed patterns that were dictated by the landscape and seasonal shifts. By understanding these behaviors, Vikings could essentially use birds as scouts, guiding their ships toward hidden shores. Historians still debate whether this reliance on birds was the sole method the Vikings used, or if they also incorporated other natural elements, like the behavior of fish or changes in the color of the sea, to give them clues. What's clear is that the Vikings were attuned to nature in ways that many of us today have forgotten, and they knew how to observe subtle signs in the environment that others might miss. As you stand there watching the crew scanning the sky, you realize just how much the Vikings depended on their connection to the natural world. It wasn't just a matter of sailing from point A to point B. It was about understanding a system of cues that worked together, giving them a profound sense of direction. This wasn't navigation as we know it today, with technology and clear maps. This was something more primal, an ancient wisdom that combined experience with a deep respect for the elements. But there's another element that the Vikings relied on that is a bit more mysterious, something that could change everything about how they navigated across the seas, especially when the skies weren't clear and the stars and sun were hidden from view. As the wind picks up and the sun dips low on the horizon, you feel the weight of the Viking world closing in. The crew mutters quietly amongst themselves, their eyes scanning for any hint of land or celestial body to offer guidance. But you don't have time for a leisurely stroll. There's a secret to Viking navigation that you have yet to uncover. You've heard whispers, perhaps from older sailors or sagas passed down through generations, of a strange and mysterious object, the Sunstone. It's said to be the Vikings' secret weapon, an unassuming crystal that could reveal the position of the sun, even when it was hidden behind clouds or the horizon. You can almost hear the crew's hushed discussions about it, their reverence palpable. This ancient artifact, rumored to have mystical properties, was key to their extraordinary voyages. But how did it work? As you contemplate this enigma, the Sunstone begins to take shape in your mind. Picture it now, a small translucent crystal that fits easily in the palm of your hand. Viking navigators would use it to determine the sun's location in the sky, even when it was obscured by clouds, fog, or the horizon's curve. By holding the stone up to the light, they could see patterns of polarized light that revealed the sun's exact position, allowing them to orient themselves even on the most treacherous days at sea. Historians still argue whether Vikings used the sunstone as often as the sagas suggest, or if it was a rare tool reserved for special expeditions. What is clear, however, is that the sunstone was a remarkable tool, far ahead of its time. The Vikings weren't simply sailing blindly in the dark. They had a level of understanding about the natural world that allowed them to navigate with incredible precision, no matter what the weather threw at them. The beauty of the sunstone is in its simplicity. Unlike complex navigational instruments, this small, magical-seeming stone could help the Vikings avoid becoming lost in a world where the horizon often looked the same for days on end. Imagine holding it in your hand as you stare out at the foggy ocean, knowing that this tiny tool could guide you through an otherwise impossible situation. It was as if the Vikings had unlocked a secret of the universe, a tiny piece of knowledge that made the great uncharted world more navigable. But this wasn't the only tool the Vikings had at their disposal to find their way across the vast seas. No, the Vikings were incredibly resourceful, far beyond what most of us can fathom today. Their navigational toolkit was a blend of the tangible and the almost mystical, relying not just on physical objects like the sunstone, but also on deep knowledge of the stars, winds, and ocean currents. Imagine that you're holding a sunstone in your hand, your fingers brushing against its smooth surface as you search for any glint of light that could reveal the hidden sun. The sense of awe that accompanies this discovery is matched only by the realization of just how resourceful the Vikings truly were in their ability to conquer the seas. The air around you feels heavy, charged with anticipation, as you continue to sail through the endless expanse of ocean. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the sky has darkened, revealing a blanket of stars. Above you, the constellations twinkle, each one holding a secret to the direction you must follow. The Vikings, skilled navigators of the ancient seas, knew how to read the night sky like a map etched in the heavens. This wasn't just stargazing for amusement, it was survival. Tonight, the stars are your guides, leading you forward across an unpredictable sea. You look to the north, where the North Star, Polaris, hangs above the ship like a steadfast sentinel. It's more than just a bright star in the night sky. It's the Viking navigators' compass, their unwavering point of reference. The North Star was critical for guiding the Vikings on their long voyages. It's the one star that remains fixed in the sky, unlike other stars that appear to shift and move as the Earth rotates. Polaris was so important to Viking navigation that it became central to their understanding of direction. To the Vikings, the North Star didn't just point the way. It was an anchor, a constant that they could rely on when everything else seemed uncertain. Historians still argue over how exactly the Vikings used Polaris, with some suggesting they could measure its height above the horizon to determine their latitude, while others believe they simply used it to stay on course in the most basic sense. What we do know is that the North Star played a crucial role in their exploration. When all other points of reference disappeared into the darkness, this star remained, like a guiding light in the vast ocean. But the Vikings didn't just rely on one star for guidance. No, they were masters of the night sky, and they understood that the heavens were full of signs and clues that could help them navigate. The stars were arranged in patterns and constellations that served as road signs, pointing the way to their destinations. Some of these constellations were visible only in certain seasons, and the Vikings had learned to read these patterns like the back of their hands. You might wonder, how did they do it without modern tools like compasses or sophisticated instruments? The answer lies in their deep connection to the land and sky. The Vikings had an incredible sense of observation, honed through years of practice and experience. They could identify the changing patterns of stars, the shift in the seasons, and the subtle movements of celestial bodies. With this knowledge, they could follow invisible paths across the vast ocean, relying not on modern technology, but on ancient wisdom passed down through generations. Imagine sailing across the open sea, the wind in your hair and the cold air biting at your skin, with only the stars to guide you. You're following the same celestial patterns the Vikings followed, with the North Star your steady beacon in the sky. It's as though the stars themselves are leading you, an invisible hand guiding your ship across the darkness of the ocean. The Vikings' ability to navigate by the stars was not just a testament to their skill, but a reflection of their profound understanding of the natural world. The night sky is a vast, sprawling canvas, and you can't help but feel a sense of awe as you sail deeper into the heart of Viking navigation. Your eyes continue to track the stars overhead, but there's one star that stands out among them all: the North Star, Polaris. It's a steady, constant presence, a beacon that shines brightly from the northern sky. As the Vikings traveled far and wide across the seas, this star became more than just a celestial object. It was their anchor, their compass, their constant in an unpredictable world. The Vikings, master sailors of their time, relied on Polaris to guide their longships through the night, especially when they were far from land and surrounded by the vast, empty ocean. The beauty of the North Star is that it remains fixed in the sky, while all the other stars seem to move with the rotation of the Earth. This fixed position made it an ideal reference point for Viking navigators, who could use it to stay on course even when the world around them seemed to shift with every wave. Historians still debate exactly how the Vikings used the North Star in their navigation. Some believe that they measured the angle of Polaris above the horizon to determine their latitude, much like how modern sailors use a sextant to calculate their position. Others argue that the Vikings didn't have the tools to make such precise measurements, and instead relied more on the star's fixed position to guide them, using it as a directional reference point. Either way, it's clear that the North Star played an indispensable role in helping the Vikings find their way across the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. But the North Star wasn't the only celestial tool in the Vikings' navigation arsenal. They also relied on other stars and constellations, each one marking a specific point in the sky that helped them chart their course. Some of these stars were part of the larger constellations, like Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, which the Vikings used to find the North Star. Others, like the star Aldebaran, were visible at certain times of the year and could indicate the changing of the seasons, signaling when to set sail or when to prepare for winter. The Vikings didn't just look up at the stars for navigation. They also understood the subtle ways the stars moved across the sky over the course of the year. By studying the patterns of the stars, they were able to recognize seasonal shifts and predict changes in the weather, which was crucial for timing their voyages. The stars were like old friends to the Vikings, and their movements became part of the rhythm of Viking life. They were more than just guides. They were part of a larger system that helped the Vikings connect to the world around them in a way that went beyond mere survival. Imagine being out there on the open sea, surrounded by the dark, endless expanse of water. You can feel the cool breeze on your face, the sound of the waves crashing against the hull, and the sense of isolation that comes with being so far from land. Yet above you, the stars shine down, their light steady and unwavering. The North Star guides you through the night, and the other constellations offer their silent support. You are part of a centuries-old tradition, following the same celestial paths that Viking navigators followed long before you. And with each passing moment, you realize just how profound their knowledge of the night sky truly was. As the night deepens and the winds shift ever so slightly, you catch a glimpse of something else that's becoming familiar in your mind's eye: the shoreline. The Vikings, for all their mastery of celestial navigation, also relied heavily on something more immediate, more tangible, when they weren't out in the open ocean. When they were close enough to land, their navigation methods shifted to incorporate one of the most important aspects of Viking travel: the physical landscape. This was a world where the visible and the invisible blended together, and the Vikings learned to use everything from coastal landmarks to natural formations as their road signs, guiding them safely to their destinations. The coastlines were like vast living maps to the Vikings, constantly shifting with the ebb and flow of the tide, but still reliably there to help them orient themselves. The Vikings were experts at reading these physical cues, understanding how the land and water interacted in order to predict where they were and where they were headed. Shores weren't just areas to navigate by, they were environments that provided vital context to their travels. You start to realize that the Vikings didn't just follow a map, they followed a living, breathing landscape. One of the most effective ways the Vikings navigated the coastline was by using large, distinctive landmarks visible from the sea. These could include towering cliffs, unique rock formations, or even entire islands that stood out on the horizon like sentinels guarding the coast. A single prominent hill could help a Viking crew keep their bearings as they sailed along the jagged edges of Norway, Iceland, or the windswept shores of the British Isles. When the horizon was cluttered with smaller features, a clear and easily identifiable landmark could be the key to making sure the crew stayed on course. Historians still debate the exact methods used by the Vikings to determine their position along the coastlines. Did they use only visible landmarks, or were there more sophisticated techniques at play, such as remembering the direction of tides or specific patterns in the waves? What's undeniable, though, is that the Vikings knew their home waters better than anyone. Their intimate knowledge of coastal geography was an invaluable asset, allowing them to travel confidently, even in uncertain conditions. You might picture yourself now, standing on deck, staring at a line of jagged cliffs in the distance. The coastline ahead of you isn't just a vague, shifting outline, it's a series of signposts, each one giving you an indication of where you are. Maybe it's a sharp peak or a particular bay. The coastline is like an old friend, familiar and comforting, a reliable guide as you move forward into the unknown. But the Vikings didn't just rely on large, obvious landmarks to guide them. They also understood the subtler details of the coastline, from the shifts in the tides to the way the waves broke along different points of land. These small but significant changes in the water could indicate a hidden cove or a dangerous reef lurking just beneath the surface. The Vikings learned to read these signs like sailors who had lived their entire lives on the water, knowing that one wrong move could spell disaster. As you stand there, you begin to understand how much these subtleties played into the Vikings' overall navigational skill set. The shoreline, in all its natural beauty and danger, becomes the ultimate tool in their navigation toolkit, reinforcing the notion that Vikings didn't just travel, they lived in symbiosis with the land and sea. The coastline wasn't just a backdrop for their voyages. It was an active, living participant in their navigation strategy, shaping the way they traveled and the success of their expeditions. The salty air swirls around you as your ship cuts through the waters and the coastline continues to slip into view. You've started to recognize the rhythm of Viking navigation, how they blended celestial bodies, landmarks, and the sea itself into one seamless understanding of the world. But as you look at the shore, you realize something. The Vikings didn't just rely on immediate landmarks and the stars. They had something even more remarkable: maps. But not maps like we think of today, with neatly drawn lines and grids. No, Viking maps were something else entirely. They were more intuitive, more abstract, drawn from memory, experience, and oral tradition. You can almost hear the words of the Viking elders who passed down their knowledge of geography through generations. These maps weren't meant to be exact replicas of the land. Rather, they were tools for direction, guiding the Vikings on their voyages with a few key features and symbols. The maps were often simple, rough sketches, but to the trained eye, they held a wealth of information about the land, the seas, and the routes that connected them. In fact, many of these maps were more like visual stories, telling the tale of a journey that had been taken or a route that needed to be followed. Historians still argue whether these Viking maps were ever fully accurate representations of geography or if they were more symbolic in nature. Some scholars suggest that the maps were drawn based on memory alone, as the Vikings relied heavily on oral traditions, and much of their knowledge was passed down through stories rather than written records. Others believe that some Viking maps were based on a more literal understanding of the world, with routes and locations drawn out from actual experiences and travels. What's clear is that the Vikings didn't need sophisticated cartography. They had something better: a deep, collective memory of the world around them. As you consider these ancient maps, it strikes you how much reliance the Vikings had on the human mind, the power of memory, and the ability to communicate experiences through storytelling. It wasn't just about lines on a page or geographical accuracy. It was about the shared knowledge of a community that understood their world in ways that are hard for us to grasp. The Vikings didn't need to chart every single detail of the land. Instead, they carried their maps within themselves, passed from one generation to the next. In the heart of your journey, you begin to see how these maps, drawn in the minds of the navigators, served as more than just tools. They were symbols of trust and unity. They spoke of a time when the world wasn't mapped in the way we know it today. For the Vikings, their maps were living things, shaped by their adventures and by their understanding of the world that could only be passed through words and shared experiences. Imagine standing on the deck now, gazing at the horizon, knowing that this vast expanse had been charted in the minds of those who came before you. The sea, the stars, and the shore were all woven together into a map that was as fluid and dynamic as the waters themselves. But even these simple maps had their limitations. The Vikings faced challenges far beyond just navigating the coastline. When they ventured out into the open ocean, there were no landmarks to guide them. This posed a completely different set of challenges. How would they navigate when the world around them was nothing but endless water? What tools could they rely on when even the stars were hidden? The answer, as you'll see, is both simple and profound. The Vikings used the very tides of the ocean to guide them. Oh, you stand on the ship's deck, feeling the rhythm of the waves beneath your feet. There's something different in the water today, a subtle shift in the tides, the swell of the ocean moving in a predictable pattern. For a moment, it feels like the ocean is breathing, and you realize that, to the Vikings, this was no random force. The tides weren't just a part of nature. They were a navigational tool, one that could mean the difference between a successful voyage and disaster. The Vikings didn't just trust the stars or their memories. They also understood the intricate dance of the tides and the currents. The sea, it turns out, has its own rhythm, and the Vikings were among the few who truly learned how to read it. This knowledge wasn't something they could simply learn from maps or stories. It was something they learned by experience. Over generations, the Vikings became experts in understanding the patterns of the tides, knowing when to expect them to rise or fall, and how they would affect their ships' movements. It was a crucial part of their seafaring knowledge, allowing them to sail with the currents or against them, depending on the route they needed to take. Historians still debate how exactly the Vikings observed and understood the tides. Some suggest that they used simple tools like floating objects or marks along the shore to track the changes in the water's level. Others believe that their knowledge was based purely on observation, passing down the experience of countless sailors who had learned to recognize the subtle signs of the ocean. What is certain is that the Vikings understood the tidal rhythm so well that they could anticipate changes in the sea long before they became obvious. It wasn't just about sailing with the wind, it was about using the tides to their advantage. Imagine yourself aboard the ship again, the water stretching endlessly before you. You can feel the ship moving in harmony with the rising tide, gliding smoothly across the water. This knowledge of the tides gave the Vikings an incredible edge. They didn't just wait for the sea to move, they anticipated its changes, using them to guide their ships through difficult waters. When they were approaching land, for instance, they would time their arrival with the tides, ensuring they could safely navigate through shallow waters or avoid hidden rocks. When they were sailing in open water, the tides could carry them toward their destination with minimal effort, saving their energy for the more challenging parts of the journey. The ocean currents were just as important, often guiding the Vikings on their long voyages across the North Atlantic. Understanding the movement of the currents allowed the Vikings to follow invisible paths through the water, using the ocean's natural flow to carry them forward. It's almost as if the Vikings were riding the waves themselves, letting the sea pull them in the direction they needed to go. This reliance on the tides and currents was something that set the Vikings apart from other sailors of their time. It was a knowledge that was passed down orally through generations of sailors who learned to understand the subtle shifts in the water, the way it moved and pulled with the lunar cycle. As you feel the ship glide over the water, you begin to appreciate how the Vikings, with their deep connection to the sea, were able to navigate in ways that seem almost impossible today. They didn't just sail the seas, they moved with them, like part of the very currents they sailed on. The tides weren't just a natural force to be dealt with, they were a partner in their journey, an element they understood intimately, guiding them through the unknown with precision and grace. The ship continues its steady progress through the rolling waves, the rhythm of the ocean, guiding you forward. As the sun rises, you begin to realize how the Vikings weren't just using the tides and stars for navigation. They were also using the tools that made their longships legendary. These remarkable vessels were more than just transportation. They were integral to the Vikings' navigation skills, finely tuned to handle the unpredictability of the sea. As the wind catches the sails and the ship tilts ever so slightly, you can almost feel the Viking longship's design come alive under your feet. The Vikings didn't simply build ships. They built tools for survival, crafted with such precision that they allowed their crews to navigate waters others would have considered impossible. The longship's design was revolutionary, combining speed, agility, and versatility in ways that made it the ultimate vessel for Viking explorers. With a shallow draft and a lightweight frame, these ships could glide across both open ocean and shallow rivers, which gave the Vikings the ability to sail up into river systems for trade and raids. But it wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about how the longship helped the Vikings chart a course across those places. The longship allowed them to travel great distances, reach isolated lands, and most importantly, do so with remarkable precision. This ability to travel not only across the open sea, but along coastlines and rivers, provided the Vikings with access to regions that were otherwise off limits to many of their contemporaries. Historians still argue about the exact advantages of the Viking longship in navigation, but one thing is certain: its design was perfectly suited for the navigation challenges of the North Atlantic. The longship's shallow draft meant that it could sail in waters that were often too shallow for larger ships, allowing the Vikings to take advantage of coastal routes and sneak past unseen. The ability to row these ships as well as sail them gave Vikings greater control over their speed and direction, even when the winds weren't favorable. This flexibility made the longship an invaluable tool for both exploration and raiding, allowing the Vikings to strike quickly and retreat just as swiftly when needed. But it wasn't just the ship's structure that made it special. It was the crew's ability to read the ship itself. The Vikings' crew was intimately familiar with the longship's capabilities, and their navigation was informed by how the ship responded to the sea. Each crew member knew the ship's movements, understood the subtle shifts in the hull, and could feel the changing conditions of the water beneath them. The longship, in a sense, became an extension of their own bodies, guiding them just as the stars or the tides might. Imagine sailing through an open stretch of water in one of these longships, the wind rushing through your hair and the sound of the waves lapping against the hull. Every shift in the ship's movement is a signal to you, a clue about what lies ahead. The longship, like a well-tuned instrument, reacts to the ocean's every whim, sometimes gracefully, sometimes with a surge of power, but always with precision. It's a perfect tool for a perfect navigator, and the Vikings knew this better than anyone. Their mastery over the longship allowed them to trust the sea more than they would have trusted anything else, knowing that their vessel could handle whatever challenges they faced. The Vikings also used the longship's design to understand the sea itself. The ship's sleekness and speed allowed the crew to gather a deeper understanding of how waves and winds interacted with the ship, helping them predict the best times to sail or wait. The longship was not just a vessel. It was a living, breathing partner in their exploration, responding to their movements and offering subtle feedback about their journey. As you stand on the deck of the longship, the wind at your back and the vast expanse of water stretching ahead, you realize that the Vikings' extraordinary success in navigation wasn't just about their ships or the elements. They were also masters of memory. It's strange to think about how, without the technology we take for granted today, the Vikings managed to explore new lands, chart new waters, and reach places that would seem impossible to most other sailors of the time. The answer lies in the deep, almost mystical practice of memorization, a skill that was crucial to Viking navigation. Unlike the maps or charts we use today, which can be carefully studied and updated, the Vikings' maps were not written down. Instead, they were etched into the memories of the sailors who relied on them. These men didn't need to carry around scrolls or books. They carried the landscape in their minds. The ability to remember vast stretches of coastline, patterns in the weather, or even specific points of land was vital to a successful voyage. The Vikings didn't just travel, they memorized their world, piece by piece, and passed that knowledge down through generations. It was as if each sailor carried a living map within them, filled with the stories of their voyages, the landmarks they'd seen, and the routes they'd taken. Historians still debate how the Vikings managed to achieve such an extraordinary level of memorization. Some argue that it was simply a matter of necessity. Their survival depended on their ability to remember, to recall specific landmarks, or even to recognize patterns in the natural world that would guide them. Others suggest that the Vikings relied on an almost spiritual connection to their surroundings, allowing them to absorb the landscapes and skies around them in a deeper way than we can understand today. Regardless of the reason, what's clear is that the Vikings' reliance on memory played a pivotal role in their ability to navigate the world with such remarkable precision. Imagine yourself in the midst of a Viking voyage, navigating along a coastline you've never seen before. You don't have a detailed map, only the whispers of the crew members passing down knowledge from their ancestors. Each crew member knows the way, not from a piece of paper, but from a deep, intuitive understanding of the landscape. A single rock formation or a particular bend in the river is enough to orient them, to remind them of a similar stretch of land from a previous journey. They don't need to stop and consult a chart. They are living charts themselves, capable of recalling intricate details of the world around them. This memory-based navigation also had its roots in the Vikings' oral traditions. Knowledge wasn't passed down through written records, it was passed down in stories. The long and detailed sagas of the Vikings, recounting their adventures, discoveries, and battles, often included important navigational information. Through these stories, the Vikings could keep track of the routes they had taken, the landmarks they had seen, and the changes in the natural world they had observed. The sagas didn't just preserve history, they preserved the knowledge necessary for survival on the open sea. As you consider this reliance on memory, you begin to realize just how deeply ingrained the act of navigation was in Viking culture. It wasn't something they could simply learn from a book or a map. It was something they lived, breathed, and carried with them every day. The memory of the land was as much a part of their survival as the winds or the stars. And just as the crew remembers the sea, the ship, and the sky, you start to understand that Viking navigation wasn't just about technique. It was about a deeper connection to the world around them. The ship crests over the waves, the morning sun beginning to shine brightly on the horizon. You find yourself contemplating the vastness of the journey ahead and the faraway lands that await you. For the Vikings, these lands weren't simply destinations. They were part of a larger narrative, one written by the explorers who ventured into harsh, unforgiving environments. Iceland and Greenland, two lands often associated with the Viking Age, stand out in your mind as prime examples of how Viking navigators didn't just conquer distant shores. They thrived in some of the most inhospitable regions on Earth. You can almost feel the chill of the Arctic winds as you imagine the first Viking explorers arriving in Greenland and Iceland. These were places where survival wasn't guaranteed, where the landscape was as rugged as it was beautiful. Yet, it was here that the Vikings began to carve out new lives, using their remarkable navigation skills to make these remote regions part of their empire. In fact, the Vikings' voyages to Iceland and Greenland were among the most incredible feats of navigation in history. The ability to navigate in these harsh, isolated environments speaks to the Vikings' incredible adaptability, resourcefulness, and determination. Historians still argue about how the Vikings managed to find and settle in these remote lands, especially considering that Iceland and Greenland are both notoriously difficult to navigate due to their icy, constantly changing landscapes. Some suggest that the Vikings used their deep understanding of the stars and the natural world to locate these regions, while others believe they relied on a combination of oral traditions and memory-based navigation, passed down through generations of seafaring explorers. What's clear is that by the time the Vikings reached these frozen lands, they had already perfected their ability to navigate by the stars, the wind, and the currents. Iceland and Greenland, while distant and harsh, were just another part of their world, one that they had learned to read and understand. Imagine yourself aboard the longship as it cuts through the icy waters, the coast of Iceland coming into view. You know that the harsh, volcanic landscape is not a place for the faint of heart, but it's home to a culture that has survived in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth. The Vikings didn't just settle here, they thrived. They built communities, established trade routes, and made Iceland an important hub for Viking civilization. The skills they had honed over generations, the ability to read the stars, the tides, and the natural world, were now helping them establish roots in a place that seemed almost impossible to survive in. The same can be said for Greenland, where the Vikings faced even more extreme conditions. The Vikings established the eastern and western settlements, despite the harsh weather and the difficulty of navigating through the ice-filled waters. They used their finely tuned navigation methods to travel along the coast, settling in areas that would support agriculture and trade. Though the settlements in Greenland eventually disappeared, the Vikings' success in these regions for several centuries is a testament to their navigational prowess. The story of the Vikings' ventures into Iceland and Greenland is more than just a tale of survival. It's a story of how deep knowledge of the world, combined with an intimate understanding of the environment, allowed them to overcome almost insurmountable challenges. These regions were unforgiving, yet the Vikings didn't just find their way. They adapted, they thrived, and they built communities that lasted long enough to shape the future of the North Atlantic. As you look out over the icy waters, you understand now that Viking navigation was more than just a tool. It was a lifestyle, a way of connecting with the world and making it work for them, no matter how harsh or unpredictable it might be. You stand on the edge of the Viking world, gazing out at the open sea. The journey that began with the winds and stars has taken you far, but there's still more to explore. The Vikings were known for their travels across the North Atlantic, but they didn't stop there. Their navigational skills didn't just serve them on the familiar shores of Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland. They also helped them push farther to lands across the ocean. What's perhaps most astonishing about Viking navigation is the way they reached into the unknown, traveling to places far beyond their own world. You begin to think about the Vikings' exploration of North America, a topic that still sparks debate among historians. The Norsemen reached what is now called Newfoundland, landing in a place known as Vinland, likely centuries before Christopher Columbus even set sail. The evidence, while sparse, suggests that Viking navigators were crossing the Atlantic with remarkable precision, using their incredible skills to navigate not just by the stars, but by the currents and the subtle environmental cues that surrounded them. It wasn't just about getting to land. It was about understanding where to go, what to look for, and how to survive once you arrived. Historians still argue about whether the Vikings truly made it to North America and how far their exploration extended into the Western Hemisphere. The archaeological evidence at Lonsall Meadows in Newfoundland confirms that Norse explorers were there, but questions still linger about how they made it there. Did they use a combination of celestial navigation, wind patterns, and environmental cues to guide them? Did they map their routes with the same precision they had used in their previous voyages? While we may never know all the answers, what is certain is that the Vikings had the ability to navigate vast, treacherous seas with remarkable precision. And their journey to Vinland is one of the most fascinating chapters in their history. Imagine being a Viking sailor, standing at the bow of your ship as you approach the coast of North America. The shores are unlike anything you've seen before. Dense forests stretch for miles, and the landscape is vast and untamed. You didn't just stumble upon this place. You knew exactly where you were going. You had read the winds, understood the currents, and followed the subtle clues in the water that led you here. Even though the ocean is vast, and even though the land is distant, it's all part of the same world you've been navigating for years. The stars, the tides, the winds, they've all guided you across an ocean to a place where few had ever gone before. It's remarkable to think about how the Vikings, armed only with their ships, their memories, and their ability to read the environment, ventured so far from home. While we often think of Viking navigation as a tool for raiding and trading, it was also a tool for discovery. They didn't just conquer new lands, they found new worlds, stretching the boundaries of their civilization and the limits of what was possible for their time. But the journey to Vinland was not without its challenges. The Vikings faced unfamiliar environments, harsh winters, and, ultimately, a struggle to establish lasting settlements. Even though their presence in North America was relatively short-lived, it was a testament to their ability to navigate and adapt to whatever challenges the sea and the land threw at them. As you look out over the water now, you realize that Viking navigation wasn't just about practical skills. It was about adventure, exploration, and the human desire to push beyond the known world and into the great unknown. The Vikings didn't just sail. They ventured, they explored, and they mapped the world in a way that no one else had before them. As you continue your voyage, the memory of Vinland lingers in your mind. The Vikings' farthest reach, a distant land across the vast ocean, was not just an act of exploration. It was a testament to the bravery and ingenuity of a people who had already mastered one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Yet, while the Viking explorations to North America were impressive, their methods of navigation were also crucial to understanding how they managed such feats. Viking navigation, as we've seen, was far from simple. It was a complex and sophisticated combination of natural phenomena, tools, and memory, all woven together to create a system that was uniquely suited to their world. But how did the Vikings manage to keep track of these vast, sometimes treacherous journeys across the Atlantic? One answer lies in the development of what could be called the Viking compass. Not a modern compass in the sense we understand it today, but a rudimentary yet incredibly effective tool. Early Norsemen are believed to have used something akin to a sun compass to help them navigate when the sun was visible. The sun compass worked by using the sun's position in the sky to indicate direction. Vikings would use the shadow cast by the sun to determine the cardinal directions, relying on their understanding of the sun's path across the sky to keep them on track. Historians still debate whether the Vikings used the sun compass in the way it has been reconstructed today, or if it was an even simpler form of directional finding. What is agreed upon, however, is that the Vikings were highly attuned to the sun's movement and could calculate direction based on its position in the sky at different times of the day. This technique was particularly useful during the summer months when the sun didn't set in the far north. On those long, light-filled days, the Vikings could rely on their understanding of the sun's movement to help them stay oriented, even when they were thousands of miles from their homeland. But the sun compass wasn't the only tool in the Viking navigator's kit. The Vikings were also rumored to have used something even more mysterious, the sunstone, a crystal that could polarize light and reveal the hidden position of the sun, even when it was obscured by clouds or fog. Imagine holding this small, seemingly insignificant stone in your hand as you sail across the open sea, unable to see the sun, but knowing that this crystal could reveal its hidden position. The sunstone's use is still the subject of scholarly debate, with some suggesting that it was an essential tool for the Vikings, while others believe it might have been more of a myth or legend than a practical navigation tool. Still, the idea that such a device existed and could have been used to find the sun's position is an incredible testament to the ingenuity of Viking navigators. As you continue your journey aboard the longship, you begin to appreciate just how much the Vikings had to rely on their resourcefulness and knowledge of the natural world, whether it was the stars, the sun, the winds, or even the subtle movements of the ocean itself. The Vikings had a deep understanding of the environment that allowed them to navigate with precision. But it wasn't just the physical tools they used. It was their ability to read the world around them. They didn't simply navigate in the way we think of today, with maps and compasses. They navigated by memory, by intuition, by experience. This was especially true when the Vikings ventured into unfamiliar waters, where the signs weren't always as clear. The waters of the North Atlantic, with their changing tides, shifting winds, and unpredictable weather patterns, were a true test of the Vikings' navigational prowess. They learned to read the subtle cues in the ocean, knowing when to trust the current, when to follow the wind, and when to rely on the stars. The Vikings weren't just traveling across the sea, they were living in harmony with it, reading its every movement and using it to their advantage. Imagine navigating through these waters yourself. The open ocean stretches out before you, and the wind whispers through the sails. The waves crash against the ship, but you are undeterred. You know how to read the water. You know when to trust the currents and when to fight against them. You understand the subtle shifts in the wind, how it can change in an instant, and how to use it to steer your ship toward your destination. This is Viking navigation, an intricate, ever-evolving system that blends knowledge, memory, and connection with the natural world. As you journey deeper into the Vikings' world, you start to understand just how crucial timing was to their navigation. Every aspect of Viking exploration and sea travel was carefully calculated, and that included the timing of their voyages. The Vikings' world was not just one of spontaneous journeys or blind exploration. They were masters at knowing when to embark on their voyages, when to return home, and when to wait for better conditions. One of the most remarkable elements of Viking navigation was their understanding of the seasons and their ability to time their voyages based on the patterns of nature. The Vikings followed a cyclical calendar, closely attuned to the rhythms of the natural world. This calendar was shaped by the changing seasons, the patterns of migration for animals and birds, and the seasonal winds and tides. As the days grew longer and the sun rose higher in the sky, the Vikings knew it was time to set sail. The light summer months in the northern latitudes meant more favorable conditions for long sea voyages, especially when the sun stayed high in the sky for most of the day. Winter, on the other hand, was a time for resting and preparation, when the cold winds and rough seas made travel dangerous. Historians still debate how exactly the Viking calendar worked, but many scholars believe that the Vikings divided their year into two main seasons, the sailing season and the winter season. The sailing season was when the Viking ships would venture out into the open sea, often beginning in late spring or early summer and continuing through the fall. During this time, the weather was more predictable, the days were longer, and the Vikings could take advantage of the favorable winds and currents. It was also the time when they would conduct raids, explore new lands, and establish new settlements. The winter months, however, were a different story. During this time, the Vikings hunkered down in their settlements, tending to their crops, repairing their ships, and preparing for the next year's journey. This period of rest was essential to their success, as it allowed them to recover from the grueling voyages of the summer and to plan their next moves carefully. It was also during the winter months that the Vikings would pass down their knowledge of navigation through oral traditions, ensuring that each generation was well equipped to take on the challenges of the sea. But it wasn't just the seasons themselves that guided Viking navigators. It was also their understanding of the patterns in nature. The Vikings knew that the timing of their voyages had to align with not just the weather, but also with the behavior of the animals, the winds, and the tides. They understood that certain birds would appear at specific times of year, signaling the approach of land or the beginning of migration patterns. They also knew when the winds would shift, how the currents would change, and how the shifting tides could affect their navigation. All of these elements played into the Vikings' decision-making process, allowing them to navigate with remarkable accuracy, even over vast distances. Imagine standing aboard a Viking longship, the wind in your face, the salt of the sea in the air, and the horizon stretching out before you. You know that the timing of your journey is just as important as the route you take. The world around you is alive with the subtle changes in nature that tell you it's time to go or time to wait. As a Viking navigator, you've learned to trust these cues, whether it's the shift in the wind, the rise of certain stars, or the migration of birds. That signal, it's time to sail. You don't need a clock or a map. You have something far more reliable, the rhythms of the world around you. The Vikings' understanding of timing was critical, especially when they embarked on long voyages across the open sea. They knew that setting out too early or too late could mean encountering dangerous weather, rough seas, or an unproductive journey. But with the right timing, their voyages could be successful beyond imagination. Timing their voyages correctly allowed them to not only survive, but thrive in the wildest parts of the North Atlantic. You begin to understand how the Vikings' success at sea was not simply a matter of knowing how to navigate. It was also about the stories they told, the myths they believed, and the role of their gods in guiding them across the world. To the Vikings, the sea was not just a physical environment. It was a realm inhabited by gods and supernatural forces. Viking navigators, in their quest to sail the seas, were deeply influenced by the rich tapestry of mythology and spirituality that shaped their understanding of the world. Viking mythology, which is woven into their navigational practices, can be seen in their belief in gods like Odin, Thor, and Njord, the god of the sea and winds. Njord, in particular, was thought to be the patron god of sailors, offering protection and safe passage to those who called upon him. Sailors would often invoke Njord's name before embarking on a journey, asking for favorable winds and calm seas. It was not uncommon for Viking crews to perform rituals or make offerings to the gods before setting sail, ensuring divine favor for the dangerous voyages ahead. Historians still argue about the role of mythology in Viking navigation. Some scholars suggest that these rituals and beliefs were symbolic, helping to boost morale and create a sense of unity among the crew. Others believe that these religious practices were deeply intertwined with Viking navigation, influencing how they perceived the natural world and their place in it. Whatever the truth may be, it's clear that the Vikings' belief in their gods and their connection to the spiritual realm played a significant role in their voyages. Imagine being a Viking sailor as you prepare to leave the shores of Scandinavia. Before setting out into the vast unknown, you and your crew gather around a small fire, offering up prayers to Njord, asking for his protection and guidance. You feel the weight of tradition, of centuries of sailors before you who have done the same. The belief in the gods isn't just a comfort, it's a necessary part of your journey. You know that the sea can be unpredictable, that the winds can change at a moment's notice, and that the storm clouds on the horizon might bring danger. But you also know that, by honoring the gods, you've done what you can to ensure safe passage. With each offering, each prayer, the confidence in your heart grows stronger. Viking navigators did not simply trust their skill and knowledge of the world. They trusted the gods to help them in their endeavors. And this spiritual connection to the world around them, to the sea and the elements, is something that set them apart from other cultures. To the Vikings, the sea was a sacred place, a realm where the natural and supernatural worlds collided, where they were guided not only by their skills, but by the divine forces that watched over them. But the gods were not the only thing that the Vikings believed in. The Vikings also believed in the concept of fate, the idea that certain events were destined to happen, that no matter how hard you tried to change your course, there was a greater plan at work. This belief in fate was tied closely to their navigation, as they would often embark on dangerous voyages with the understanding that if their journey was meant to succeed, it would. It wasn't just about using the stars or the wind to find your way. It was about trusting that the gods and fate would guide you to where you needed to be. The spiritual beliefs of the Vikings added a deeper layer to their navigation techniques. Their gods weren't just figures of legend. They were a vital part of their understanding of the world, influencing how they read the stars, how they understood the tides, and how they made decisions at sea. Every journey the Vikings embarked on was not just a physical journey, it was a spiritual one as well, filled with meaning, purpose, and a connection to the divine. As you sail now, you begin to feel a shift in the atmosphere around you, a quiet sense of the divine. The winds shift gently, the sea calms, and the stars seem to shine brighter. Perhaps, in the vast expanse of the open ocean, the Vikings were right to believe that there was more than just the natural world guiding them. Maybe the sea itself held the touch of the gods, watching over them, guiding them across the waves to places they had never imagined. As you continue your journey, the sea around you grows quieter, the world around you vast and still. The Vikings, with their unique blend of practical knowledge and spiritual beliefs, didn't just navigate the seas with instruments and environmental cues, they did so with an almost symbiotic connection to the ocean itself. Their ability to read the sea was not only about recognizing the rhythms of the tides or tracking the stars, it was about understanding the natural flow of the water, knowing how to listen to the waves, and trusting that the ocean was as much a part of their crew as their shipmates. For the Vikings, the sea was more than just a force of nature. It was a living entity, a world of its own that could either help or hinder them depending on their actions. The relationship between the Vikings and the sea was a mutual one, based on respect and understanding. They understood that the sea had its own rhythms, its own patterns, and those who sailed it had to become attuned to its ever-changing nature. The sea wasn't just a vast and empty expanse. It was a world filled with knowledge, with the answers to questions that the Vikings needed in order to find their way. To the Vikings, the sea was also a source of mystery, a place where the unknown and the known coexisted. As skilled as they were in navigating by stars, landmarks, and natural phenomena, the Vikings also believed that the sea could reveal secrets, if you knew how to listen to it. This deep connection to the sea allowed Viking navigators to anticipate shifts in the weather, changes in the tides, and even the presence of land long before they were visible to the naked eye. They understood how the water could carry them, and how the right shift in the current could take them toward land or further out into the unknown. Historians still debate how the Vikings developed this intimate understanding of the sea, with some believing it was the result of centuries of trial and error, while others suggest that the Vikings' connection to the ocean was more than just practical knowledge. It was almost mystical. The ocean was their home, and they had learned to read it as one would read a book, understanding its mood, its patterns, and its flow in ways that most cultures at the time couldn't fathom. Imagine being a Viking sailor, standing at the helm as the ship rides the waves. You don't just feel the ship responding to the water. You feel as if you and the ocean are part of a greater whole. The swells, the ebb and flow, the gentle rock of the ship, it's all a part of you, guiding you forward on your journey. The wind whispers its secrets in your ear, and you understand it instinctively. There's no need for detailed maps or technology, just a deep, ancient knowledge of the world around you, passed down through generations. The sea speaks to you in ways that only the most experienced navigators can understand, and as you sail, you begin to sense that you are part of something much bigger than yourself. But the Vikings didn't only use their connection to the sea for practical purposes, they also understood the rhythm of the ocean as a spiritual force. The sea was as much a realm of the gods as the skies, and navigating it successfully required not only skill and knowledge, but also a deep respect for its power. As the Vikings sailed through the open water, they saw themselves as part of an ongoing, ancient relationship with the world, one that spanned not only generations, but the very forces of nature itself. The ocean was as unpredictable as it was vast, but the Vikings knew how to read it, how to listen to its whispers, and how to understand its flow. The sea was both a mystery and a guide, a force of nature that they had come to understand like no one else. As you sail forward, you too begin to feel that connection, as if the sea is no longer just a thing to navigate, but a part of you, guiding you toward your own destination. Away, the ship continues its journey, slicing through the waves as the horizon stretches endlessly before you. The sky above is a deepening shade of blue, the stars starting to peek out as the sun sets. But as you sail forward, you realize that even with all the Viking navigators' remarkable skills, the stars, the tides, the sunstone, the longship itself, there was one crucial factor that they depended on most of all: timing. Viking navigation wasn't just about knowing how to read the stars or how to use the winds. It was about knowing when to go and when to stay. The Viking seasonal calendar was more than just a way of tracking time. It was a system of navigation that dictated when expeditions would take place. Their voyaging wasn't a spontaneous activity. It was planned around the natural cycles of the year, ensuring that they were sailing at the most optimal times. The ideal sailing window was during the summer months, when days were long and the weather relatively predictable. The days stretched endlessly, allowing for long voyages and plenty of daylight hours to navigate by. The timing of these voyages wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a matter of survival. Historians continue to explore how precise Viking timing was in their navigation methods. Some suggest that the Vikings had a sophisticated understanding of the solstices and equinoxes, allowing them to predict the length of the days and use the sun as a key tool in their navigation system. Others believe that the Vikings relied more on practical experience, adjusting their sailing windows based on the patterns of the weather, the ocean currents, and the seasonal winds. Either way, the timing of their voyages was crucial to their success. They weren't just navigating in terms of space. They were navigating time itself, aligning their journeys with the seasons, the weather, and the stars to ensure they reached their destination safely. Imagine yourself on the deck of the longship, the cool night air sweeping over you as you gaze at the stars. You know that the timing of your journey is as critical as the ship you're sailing on or the winds you're riding. The sun will rise soon and the light will guide your way, but only if you're ready to take full advantage of it. The Viking sailors didn't just use the sun to navigate. They used the timing of the sun's rise and set to dictate when they should be on the move. A day spent waiting for favorable winds or tides could mean the difference between success and failure. A well-timed departure when the weather is right and the stars are aligned could lead to a smooth voyage. But if the timing was off, if they set sail too early or too late, the journey could become treacherous and uncertain. The Vikings knew the risks of sailing in uncharted waters, and they understood that the sea was always in flux. Their success wasn't just about knowing where they were. It was about knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to move forward. Their connection to the environment wasn't just an instinct. It was a refined, practiced understanding of how the world around them worked. This sense of timing extended beyond their sailing seasons. The Vikings also planned their voyages around the rhythms of the sea, understanding when certain currents would be most favorable for their journey and when the tides would be at their most cooperative. This deep understanding of natural rhythms, honed through years of experience, was integral to their navigational success. When they sailed, they were not just travelers. They were participants in the larger flow of nature, moving in tune with the world around them. Picture yourself now, fully immersed in the Viking way of navigation. You're not just on a ship, you are part of the world, as much a part of the sea and the sky as the ship itself. Every decision, every movement is made with an awareness of the natural forces at play. The waves, the tides, the winds, and the sun are all part of a grand symphony, and you, as a Viking navigator, have learned to play your part to perfection. The skill to read the world around you, its timing, its rhythms, is what has allowed the Vikings to conquer the seas and find their way to new worlds. It is this skill, perhaps more than any other, that separates the Viking sailors from others who might have sailed the same waters. The wind begins to pick up, the ship creaking as it adjusts to the new swell of the waves. The Vikings' connection to the sea goes beyond just the tools, the ships, or the timing. It's about their ability to recognize the rhythm of the world. The ocean, though vast and unpredictable, isn't a place where chaos reigns. It's a place where patterns exist, and these patterns, whether in the movement of the tides, the flight of the birds, or the position of the stars, are what allow the Vikings to find their way. you begin to realize that the Vikings had not just a practical knowledge of the sea, but an almost spiritual understanding of the natural world. The rhythms of nature, the wind, the tides, the seasonal shifts, were as much a part of Viking navigation as the stars themselves. The sea, with all its vastness, wasn't a place to be feared, it was a place to be understood. The Vikings knew how to listen to the sea. They could read the subtle movements of the water, the way the waves shifted with the changing tides, and they used these movements to help them navigate their course. When the wind was too strong or too weak, when the waves were too unpredictable, they adjusted. If the current wasn't in their favor, they'd wait for the right moment, letting the rhythm of the ocean guide them. Historians still debate whether the Vikings had a deep scientific understanding of ocean currents or if their knowledge was more intuitive. Some believe the Vikings relied on ancient wisdom passed down through generations of sailors, while others suggest that their understanding was purely based on trial and error. Regardless of how they learned it, what's clear is that the Vikings were experts at reading the ocean. They didn't just rely on luck or chance, they read the water as if it were a living map, one that told them where they needed to go. As the ship continues its journey, you begin to think about how the Vikings used all their senses to navigate. It wasn't just about looking at the stars or feeling the wind on your face. It was about the way the ship felt beneath you, how the crew moved with the waves, how the water sounded against the hull. Every creak, every shift, every rise and fall of the ship told you something important about your course. This wasn't just navigation by numbers or tools. It was navigation by intuition, by feeling, and by connection to the world around you. Imagine being on the ship as the wind starts to change. You feel the boat's movement shift underfoot, the slight tilt of the mast as the sails fill with air. You don't need to look up to know which direction the wind is coming from or what it will do next. You've sailed these waters before, and the sea speaks to you in ways that no map or compass ever could. You can sense the ebb and flow of the tides, the shift in the air, and the subtle change in the temperature of the water. All of these cues come together to form a complex system of navigation, one that allows the Vikings to move confidently through the sea, no matter how far from home they might be. The ability to read the rhythm of the sea wasn't just something the Vikings learned. It was something they lived. It was ingrained in them, passed down through generations of sailors who had learned to work with nature, not fight against it. As you sail now, you feel that same connection growing stronger. The knowledge that the sea, the sky, and the winds are not adversaries, but guides, helping you on your journey. This connection to the natural world is what allowed the Vikings to conquer the seas, to venture into unknown territories, and to survive in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. It wasn't just about physical tools. It was about knowing how to listen to the world around you, to read its signs, and to move with its rhythms. As the ship continues to sail through the night, the air growing cooler with the approach of dawn, you begin to understand that the Vikings' navigation was not only shaped by the physical world around them, but also by the stories, myths, and codes they followed. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were practical guides to living and navigating the world. Just as sailors today rely on maritime charts, the Vikings relied on a form of navigation passed down in oral traditions. The sagas they told weren't just about battles and gods. They were maps themselves, filled with clues and references to key landmarks, routes, and paths taken by past explorers. The sagas, those epic tales that recount the history of Viking explorers, were also a source of knowledge for navigation. The famous sagas of the Icelanders and Vinland sagas aren't just literary works. They contain vital information about the Viking world, including descriptions of landscapes, rivers, and other natural markers that sailors could use to guide their voyages. These sagas were lived histories, passed down orally from one generation to the next, preserving the knowledge of explorers and navigators long before written records became commonplace. Historians still debate how much of Viking navigation was rooted in myth and how much in practical experience. Some scholars argue that many navigational details from the sagas were exaggerated or symbolic, perhaps reflecting the aspirations or ideals of the Viking people rather than exact accounts. Others suggest that these sagas, with their sometimes cryptic descriptions of land, islands, and seas, may have been encoded with real navigational information, intentionally vague to keep them secret or protected from outsiders. Imagine yourself in a Viking longhouse surrounded by the glow of a fire as an elder begins to tell a tale of a great journey. The story is full of references to landmarks, to the shifting winds and tides, to the stars that guided explorers through the dark nights. As you listen, you begin to see how these stories are more than just mythology. They are instructions. A mountain peak in the distance, a particular stretch of coastline, or the behavior of the birds can all be found in these ancient stories, and they are more than just part of the lore. They are critical pieces of the puzzle that make up Viking navigation. But it wasn't only the older generation that passed down this knowledge. The Vikings had a code among their own crew, a system of understanding that extended to their shipmates and their shared experiences. On long journeys, every crew member had a part to play. The navigator wasn't just a single person. The crew itself shared knowledge, each man contributing his experience of the world, the tides, the winds, and the landmarks they had encountered on their own voyages. This oral tradition created a collective map of the world, a living, breathing document of knowledge that was passed from one generation to the next. This collective wisdom and shared knowledge of the world were integral to Viking navigation. Every sailor aboard a Viking longship was not just a passive participant in the voyage, he was an active part of the navigation process. The crew worked together, using the combined knowledge of the entire group to stay on course. They might use the stars at night, rely on the sun and wind during the day, or read the land when they approached a shore. They shared stories and signs, exchanging information to navigate in unison. Imagine being part of that crew now, working together with your fellow sailors. As the ship tilts with the waves, each member of the crew contributes their knowledge, calling out when they see a distant bird or when they feel the wind shift. You begin to realize that the journey is not just about reaching a destination. It's about the shared experience of the journey itself. Viking navigation was more than a set of techniques. It was a way of life, a way of understanding the world that was tied to the land, the sea, and each other. As the journey continues, the hum of the wind and the creak of the longship's timbers offer a comforting rhythm beneath your feet. The stars shine above, and you begin to understand the profound connection the Vikings had with their world. Their navigation wasn't just about reading the physical environment, it was about understanding the deep, interconnected forces of nature that guided them across vast, unpredictable seas. There's one element, perhaps less frequently mentioned in Viking accounts, that seems to tie all of these skills together: the role of ocean currents. You may have noticed how the ship moves, guided by an invisible hand, the water shifting beneath it with each passing moment. Viking navigators understood that these powerful currents were just as important to their voyages as the wind or the stars. In the vastness of the open ocean, these currents could be the difference between arriving safely at a destination or drifting aimlessly. By understanding where the currents flowed, the Vikings were able to plot more efficient routes, utilizing the natural flow of the water to move their ships along at a steady pace. The North Atlantic Ocean, where the Vikings spent much of their time, is filled with a variety of currents, including the Gulf Stream, which flows from the Gulf of Mexico and up along the eastern coasts of North America and Europe. The Vikings would have been keenly aware of these currents, using them to their advantage when traveling to places like Iceland, Greenland, or even the shores of Newfoundland. In fact, the Gulf Stream is one of the primary reasons why the Vikings were able to make such long journeys across the Atlantic. By sailing with the current, they could save energy and time, allowing them to make the most of the favorable conditions. Historians continue to study how the Vikings understood ocean currents, and there are varying theories about how they navigated with such precision. Some scholars believe that they were able to map the currents using the knowledge of previous sailors to guide them. Others argue that the Vikings used subtle, observational cues to detect shifts in the water. By watching the movement of seaweed, the behavior of birds, or the way waves broke on the shore, They could deduce the strength and direction of the currents. What's clear is that the Vikings didn't just rely on the wind or the stars to find their way. They were masters at reading the ocean as a whole, understanding how every part of the sea worked together to create the conditions they needed. Now, imagine yourself standing at the bow of the longship, looking out over the endless stretch of water. The ship moves smoothly, almost effortlessly, carried forward by the gentle current beneath it. You know that you're not just sailing across the sea, you're working with it, moving in harmony with the water's natural flow. The current, much like the stars and the wind, is a tool that you can rely on, a natural force that is guiding you toward your destination. It's a feeling of profound connection, a recognition that the journey is not just about navigating the physical world, but about understanding the deeper forces that shape it. The Vikings' ability to harness the power of the currents wasn't just a matter of chance. It was the result of years of experience and accumulated knowledge. Each voyage, each journey added to the collective understanding of how the ocean worked. Over time, the Vikings learned to read the sea in ways that few other cultures could. They didn't just map coastlines or track the stars. They understood the very currents that flowed beneath the waves, shaping their journey and guiding them to new worlds. Imagine now, as you continue to sail through the night, how the Vikings might have felt as they glided across the ocean, carried by the currents. They had unlocked a secret of the sea, a hidden power that allowed them to move with ease across great distances. The currents were like the invisible pathways that connected the islands, coasts, and lands they sought. They had learned to move with the sea, not against it, allowing them to venture into the unknown with confidence. The night drifts by, and the stars above seem to shift, guiding your way across the endless expanse of the sea. As the Vikings traveled far and wide, exploring distant lands, they did so not just through the physical tools of navigation, but through a cultural understanding that shaped their entire way of life. One element that was intrinsic to their success was their deep connection to the seasons and the cyclical nature of time. For the Vikings, navigation wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about aligning with the natural world, moving in harmony with the Earth's rhythms. Their knowledge of seasonal shifts played a pivotal role in when they sailed, and more importantly, where they went. Unlike modern sailors who rely on precise weather forecasting, the Vikings had to rely on centuries of tradition passed down through stories and shared knowledge to predict the conditions of the seas. In the harsh climates of Scandinavia, understanding the seasonal changes was essential. The Vikings understood that the short summer days brought favorable conditions for long voyages, while the long, brutal winters were best spent at home, preparing for the next journey. Their expeditions were aligned with the natural rhythm of the world, which gave them a distinct advantage over others. Historians still debate the intricacies of the Viking calendar and how exactly they tracked the changing of the seasons. Some believe that the Vikings had an almost intuitive sense of time based on the length of daylight, the migration patterns of birds, and the subtle shifts in the temperature of the air and water. The change from one season to the next would have been marked by an observable change in nature, such as the appearance of certain flowers or the way the tides responded to the lunar cycle. These patterns were woven into Viking navigation like a finely tuned instrument, ensuring that every journey began at the right time, in the right season, to take advantage of the most favorable conditions. Imagine standing on the ship's deck, gazing at the horizon. The faintest light of dawn begins to illuminate the sky, signaling the start of a new day and a new season. The crew moves with purpose, ready for the journey ahead, knowing that the timing of their voyage is crucial to their success. It's not just about the wind or the current. It's about understanding the seasons and working with them. As you move into the open water, the realization sets in that Viking navigation was not just about skill. It was about the timing of life itself, working in concert with the natural world. The changing of the seasons wasn't just a backdrop to the Vikings' journey. It was a guide, a map of sorts, that dictated when to leave and when to return. As the weather grew colder in the fall, the Vikings would retreat to their homes, preparing for the hardships of winter. But once the ice had melted and the daylight hours stretched longer, the sea would once again call to them. They understood that the rhythm of the natural world was the ultimate compass, and they used it to plot their course. As the ship moves deeper into open water, the seasonal changes start to become more noticeable. The wind grows cooler, and the scent of the air changes, signaling the shift of the seasons. The days are growing longer, and with them the promise of the sailing season. The Vikings knew this change well, recognizing that the window for travel was short and must be seized with precision. It's not just about navigating a ship, it's about navigating time itself. The rhythm of the seasons wasn't just about survival, it was a way of life for the Vikings. The changing of the seasons brought with it a sense of urgency, a need to take advantage of the fleeting moments of favorable weather and the longer days. It was this deep connection to the passage of time that allowed the Vikings to traverse vast distances and conquer the seas. They didn't just navigate in space. They navigated time, understanding the natural cycles that governed their world and using them to guide their journeys. The seasonal understanding was also a cultural touchstone, deeply ingrained in Viking society. It wasn't just the sailors who understood the seasons, it was everyone. From the farmers tending to their crops, to the families waiting for the return of the ships, the rhythm of time shaped Viking life. The sailors were not just individuals navigating the seas, they were part of a larger cycle, a shared journey that connected their community, their gods, and the natural world around them. As you stand on the deck now, with the rising sun casting a golden light over the water, you realize that Viking navigation was a much more profound practice than simply knowing how to read the stars or the currents. It was a deep connection to the cycles of nature, a skill that allowed them to move across the world with purpose and precision. And in that connection, the Vikings found not just their way through the world, but their place within it. The longship continues to cut through the waves, the crew moving with a practiced rhythm as though each sailor were part of one cohesive being, working in harmony with the ship, the wind, and the sea. As you sail deeper into the heart of Viking navigation, you begin to appreciate the complexity of their approach to exploration, not just the tools and techniques, but the subtle, often overlooked elements that allowed them to traverse vast oceans and conquer distant lands. One of these hidden elements was the Viking Navigators' Code, a set of unwritten rules and shared knowledge passed down through generations. It was a system of understanding that united the crew, ensuring they remained coordinated on their perilous journey. The Navigators' Code wasn't a formalized written doctrine. It wasn't something that could be found in any books or scrolls. Instead, it was an oral tradition, part of the cultural fabric that bound the Vikings together as they set out on their long voyages. It governed everything from when to sail, to how to read the wind, to how to behave during a storm. The code was as much about keeping morale high and fostering teamwork as it was about ensuring the crew followed safe and efficient navigational practices. The rules may have been passed down in stories, or brief lessons from seasoned sailors to younger ones, or even through shared rituals before embarking on a journey. These traditions became second nature, guiding the crew in ways that ensured their survival in the often dangerous and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic. The Navigator's Code wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about ensuring the crew could always trust in their shared knowledge, each sailor knowing his role, and knowing that the entire crew depended on the success of the voyage. Historians still debate the specifics of this Navigator's Code, wondering how much it was shaped by practical need versus superstition. Some scholars suggest that it included specific rituals or gestures, actions that helped calm the crew or align their spirits with the sea. Others argue that the code focused more on the technical aspects of navigation, such as understanding the wind's behavior, using the sunstone, and predicting the seasonal patterns. Regardless of its exact content, it's clear that this shared system of knowledge was vital to the Viking success. The Navigator's Code allowed the crew to work together seamlessly, even in the most challenging conditions. Now, as you sit aboard the ship, you begin to feel the weight of this unspoken bond. You're not simply a traveler on this ship, You're part of a larger whole, moving together with your fellow sailors in perfect harmony. The rhythms of the ship, the swell of the waves, the wind in the sails, it's all part of the code that guides you. Each sailor has a role, and you play your part, contributing your knowledge of the sea, of the currents, of the wind. It's a shared understanding that transcends individual expertise. The navigator's code is more than just technique. It's the very spirit of the crew guiding them to distant lands. Imagine the sense of unity as the crew works together, knowing that every decision is made in service to the whole. A shift in the wind, a change in the tide, a landmark in the distance. Each sailor's knowledge is woven into the collective fabric, each piece contributing to the success of the journey. And as you follow this code, you feel not only the strength of the crew, but the weight of Viking tradition. The code is timeless, passed down from sailor to sailor, generation to generation, ensuring that the knowledge of the sea is never lost. As you sail forward into the unknown, this sense of unity is your guide. The navigator's code gives you not only the tools to navigate the seas, but the wisdom to understand the journey itself. You are not just moving across the ocean. You are following in the footsteps of the great navigators who came before you, relying on a code that has withstood the test of time, passed down through stories, experiences, and shared wisdom. The longship continues to cut through the waves, the crew moving with a practiced rhythm, as though each sailor were part of one cohesive being, working in harmony with the ship, the wind, and the sea. As you sail deeper into the heart of Viking navigation, you begin to appreciate the complexity of their approach to exploration, not just the tools and techniques, but the subtle, often overlooked elements that allowed them to traverse vast oceans and conquer distant lands. One of these hidden elements was the Viking navigator's code, a set of unwritten rules and shared knowledge passed down through generations. It was a system of understanding that united the crew, ensuring they remained coordinated on their perilous journey. The navigator's code wasn't a formalized written doctrine. It wasn't something that could be found in any books or scrolls. Instead, it was an oral tradition, part of the cultural fabric that bound the Vikings together as they set out on their long voyages. It governed everything from when to sail, to how to read the wind, to how to behave during a storm. The code was as much about keeping morale high and fostering teamwork as it was about ensuring the crew followed safe and efficient navigational practices. The rules may have been passed down in stories or brief lessons from seasoned sailors to younger ones, or even through shared rituals before embarking on a journey. These traditions became second nature, guiding the crew in ways that ensured their survival in the often dangerous and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic. The navigator's code wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about ensuring the crew could always trust in their shared knowledge, each sailor knowing his role and knowing that the entire crew depended on the success of the voyage. Historians still debate the specifics of this navigator's code, wondering how much it was shaped by practical need versus superstition. Some scholars suggest that it included specific rituals or gestures, actions that helped calm the crew or align their spirits with the sea. Others argue that the code focused more on the technical aspects of navigation, and such as understanding the wind's behavior, using the sunstone, and predicting the seasonal patterns. Regardless of its exact content, it's clear that this shared system of knowledge was vital to the Vikings' success. The navigator's code allowed the crew to work together seamlessly, even in the most challenging conditions. Now, as you sit aboard the ship, you begin to feel the weight of this unspoken bond. You're not simply a traveler on this ship. You're part of a larger whole, moving together with your fellow sailors in perfect harmony. The rhythms of the ship, the swell of the waves, the wind in the sails, it's all part of the code that guides you. Each sailor has a role, and you play your part, contributing your knowledge of the sea, of the currents, of the wind. It's a shared understanding that transcends individual expertise. The navigator's code is more than just technique. It's the very spirit of the crew guiding them to distant lands. Imagine the sense of unity as the crew works together, knowing that every decision is made in service to the whole. A shift in the wind, a change in the tide, a landmark in the distance. Each sailor's knowledge is woven into the collective fabric, each piece contributing to the success of the journey. And as you follow this code, you feel not only the strength of the crew, but the weight of Viking tradition. The code is timeless, passed down from sailor to sailor, generation to generation, ensuring that the knowledge of the sea is never lost. As you sail forward into the unknown, this sense of unity is your guide. The Navigator's Code gives you not only the tools to navigate the seas, but the wisdom to understand the journey itself. You are not just moving across the ocean. You are following in the footsteps of the great navigators who came before you, relying on a code that has withstood the test of time, passed down through stories, experiences, and shared wisdom. The journey continues as the ship slices through the water, its crew steady and focused, with the wind now fully at their backs, urging them forward. You've already traveled far from the shores of your homeland, and yet it seems as though there's still so much to uncover, so much more to learn from the ancient navigators of the Vikings. As your longship sails ever onward, it becomes clear that the Vikings were not simply remarkable for their navigational prowess, but for their legacy, the knowledge they passed on, the techniques they perfected, and the lasting impact their methods had on exploration for centuries. The Vikings' mastery of navigation wasn't limited to the realm of exploration. Their skills, honed over hundreds of years, served as the foundation for many of the maritime techniques that would influence explorers for generations. What was once the territory of the Vikings became the playground for future sailors, who by the time the Renaissance rolled around, would look back at Viking navigation and adapt those methods for their own journeys. Their legacy was not just one of conquest and discovery, but of enduring knowledge that shaped the way future generations would understand the sea. What's fascinating about Viking navigation is how little we fully understand it in modern terms. Some techniques remain shrouded in mystery, like the use of the sunstone or their uncanny ability to find land after long, perilous voyages. Historians still argue whether they used the sunstone as frequently as some sagas suggest, or whether their navigational techniques were more based on memory and intuition than actual tools. What we do know, however, is that the Vikings used their knowledge of the natural world, the wind, the tides, the stars, and the currents, to guide them in ways that seem nothing short of magical. In their time, they were masters of the sea, and their tools, often rudimentary by today's standards, were the most advanced of their era. As you sit on the ship's deck, you begin to reflect on the lasting impact of Viking exploration. These sailors not only discovered and explored vast new lands, but they also laid the groundwork for the interconnected world that we live in today. Without their voyages, it's hard to imagine how history would have unfolded, how trade routes would have been established, how the world would have looked without the incredible contributions of these fearless navigators. The legacy of Viking navigation extends far beyond their immediate descendants. It touches the history of global exploration and discovery, even if we don't always see the Vikings' direct influence in the modern age. In the end, the Vikings' secret to success wasn't simply their ships or their navigational tools. It was their relationship to the sea, their ability to understand and move with the natural forces of the world. They trusted in their knowledge, but they also trusted in something deeper, the rhythm of the world itself, a cosmic dance that guided them through unknown waters, taking them to places that no one else had dared to go. And in that trust, they became more than just sailors. They became masters of the sea. As the longship cuts through the waters, you feel that sense of connection to the Vikings, that understanding of their methods, their mindset, and their indomitable spirit. You've come to realize that their success was not just about the technical aspects of navigation. It was about their willingness to venture into the unknown, to embrace the mysteries of the sea, and trust in their ability to overcome the challenges it presented. The Vikings didn't just navigate the world, they shaped it. They charted courses across vast, wild oceans, finding new lands, creating stories, and building a legacy that echoes through time. And so as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water, you realize that you too are part of this legacy. The knowledge of the Vikings, their navigational skills, their understanding of the sea, and their deep connection to the natural world has traveled through centuries, influencing explorers, sailors, and adventurers to this day. You are part of that tradition now, a journey that will continue as long as there are sailors who trust in the winds, the stars, and the rhythm of the ocean. Now, as the night settles in, you can rest easy, knowing that the Vikings' mastery of navigation, their courage, and their wisdom have guided you on this journey. The longship's sails remain filled with wind, the crew working together in perfect harmony. And just as the Vikings once did, you continue forward, sailing toward the unknown with confidence, trust, and the quiet certainty that the world is yours to explore. End of script. Sweet dreams.